What's up, Reef Builders? Welcome back to another episode of Reef Recap. I'm your host, Salem Clemens. On this episode, we'll be recapping the week. We will also be having a discussion about dipping corals, best practices, things to avoid, things to look out for, things to maybe not do ever. And after that, I'm going to be doing an interactive tier list ranking a bunch of different zoanthid morphs. Pretty common on YouTube if you're familiar with this format. If not, it'll be something new. And to round things off for the night, I will be taking user questions. So to recap the week, we started off with the dip debate, and we were getting pretty beat up on there, which is why I'll be talking about it tonight. After that, we had an announcement for Remy being a speaker at Reef. There was a cool new acro shared from Walt Smith from Fiji. We had the celebration of the Year of the Dragon, so lots of dragon-related themes, different acros, as well as leafy sea dragons. After that, we had a recap post. Jen, she had her speaker post, and then we had Ross's speaker post. Shared a picture of some sun coral. Had a video of a Fiji coral shipment. They're all coming in now. Post with lots of angelfish. Some Reef Stock advertisements. Sarah Stevens will be speaking at Reef Stock as well. Some cool pictures of some really interesting platygyra. Clarion angels highlighting the video that Evie did with Jen. We had my snake polyp article. And then an announcement for Sanjay. We've had a lot of announcements this week. And then there was an article about pest control and processing of wild corals from Australia. That's pretty cool. We had the live rock debate up today, as well as the auction at Reef Stock, which will be supporting Reef Adams. So yeah, a lot of new posts this week, lots of new content. I believe there's YouTube stuff as well, but I have been so busy, I've not even got a chance to check that out yet. So make sure to check out the YouTube as well. What's up, everyone? How are we doing today? We could talk about live rock, or we can talk about dipping. Which one do we want to do? I'm thinking dipping, but if you want to talk about live rock, I can touch on that as well. I will just probably go into a rant about this and be free form. So I'll basically, this is me playing devil's advocate. I'll discuss two of the most common anti-dipping arguments I have heard. And these are not my views. This is me presenting the information that I have heard over the years to all of you. So you can make your own decisions about the debate, if people should dip corals or not, or what we should dip in. So the two most common arguments I've heard are, first, dipping could damage the microbiome and create lots of stress for corals. So we should have long-term quarantine systems with natural pest control. This could act as an alternative to using any form of chemical to get rid of pests. So, for instance, people have experimented with peppermint shrimp and camel shrimp to eat acropore eating flatworm eggs, the nudibranchs, things like that. So this would be, you get in wild corals, you put them in a system with a lot of different, basically, pest control that's natural, so different like cleanup crew options, and they would slowly pick off any pest. This is something I have seen a few people advocate for. I have not personally done it because you'd have to have a lot of different things eating all the different pests. Probably a lot of very specialized nudibranchs, which is a little bit unrealistic, at least right now, I feel like. The second argument I've heard is that all dips stress out corals. We should never stress out corals at all because it could always lead to them dying. Instead, we should accept what comes with them, throw them in the tank, whether it be a pest or not. It's survival of the fittest. And you would be surprised by the amount of people who reef this way. I've worked at a Petco. I've worked at 2 LFSs. I've been on Facebook and like every group. There are a lot of people who don't dip anything, who don't quarantine anything, fish, coral, anything. They just throw it in. If it lives, it lives. And it surprisingly works pretty well for a lot of people starting out the hobby. I mean, people that don't really know, that are ignorant about these things, will throw in anthelia and green star polyps and some sarcophytans. And the tank might have some planaria, but overall, it looks really good. So like I say, I don't personally agree with all of those. I think that the first one is an interesting argument against dips because obviously they do stress out the coral to some extent, even the most soothing of dips. So yeah, I think if you were to get some type of critter to eat every type of pest associated with coral, that could be a pretty cool alternative. But then you got things like acro-eating flatworms, which just or like white bugs, black bugs, it can just like, wreck colonies. So even if you have a predator that could attack those things, it's probably not going to wipe them out fast enough before they can kill the coral. So I think dipping is pretty necessary. There was a lot of confusion about why we posted that. I was hoping there would be more discussion about alternatives to dipping or what people dip in, But it was just everyone saying like, why is Reef Builders saying we shouldn't dip our corals? And that was not the message at all. It was the opposite. We were trying to get discussion about it. So here are my personal thoughts on dipping. And these are things that I do practice, and I think they've been successful for me. I'm not saying my way is the right way, but it's how I conceptualize things. So, for instance, we know that dipping coral stresses them out. If you're receiving a shipment of wilds or even just aquacultured stuff, right? Dipping corals immediately upon receiving them, I think, can be pretty problematic, right? That can lead to a lot more fatalities and things like maricultured acropora colonies in terms of what I've been like, working at different shops and stuff. So what we did and what I've done before is you get the shipment in, float the bag, if the salinity's off, you can drip it. If not, float it, throw it in, let it rest in a system for a couple of days. Don't dip anything yet. Let it chill out, resolve that stress response from shipping. I mean, if you got it from a wholesaler, it's been at the wholesaler for like a week that just came from overseas. Now it's going across the country again. I mean, that's how you're going to get a pathogenic event to occur and it lose everything you just purchased. So letting it chill and then dipping it later for pest has been something I have had a lot of success with. You can even do this in like basically a pre-quarantine system. So you could just like, if you got a small shipment, you could just use like a 20-gallon long and then put new water in it, have everything in there. After that, completely sterilize the tank, wipe it down with alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, whatever, and then you're good to go. So it's pre-quarantine, quarantine, grow out is kind of how I do things, and I've had a lot of success with that. So second, Bayer and a lot of other things are carcinogenic. I mean, if you have them and you don't rinse your corals afterwards, and then you put those corals in your tank, skimmers could theoretically aerosolize all of that, and then you can inhale it, and then you die. Like, not immediately, but these are known carcinogens, So I think that it's always important to use, PPE when you're dealing with things like Bayer, and also you really, really want to have a very rigorous dipping routine afterwards, like a rinse. So dip in Bayer, rinse 3 times if you have to, really shake it off, and then throw it in your system. So that's one thing, is these things can be dangerous. There's many things that are carcinogenic in the hobby, but as always, it's good to be careful and to ensure that you're not potentially harming yourself or anything in your home. So third, I do not use hydrogen peroxide, like period, ever. Don't think it's worth the risk. So here's the pathway here. So corals, they get stressed. One of the stress responses that corals will produce to deal with external invasion from pathogens, or it's just a natural part of their innate immune system, is the production of free radicals. So free radicals basically can have electrons come off of them and go and bust into different organic systems, molecules, destroys a lot of stuff, imbalances the valence shell. A lot of catastrophe happens. This is like why antioxidants are important, because having an excess of free radicals in any type of organic system can wreak havoc on that system. Hydrogen peroxide is an example of a free radical, and it is one that corals naturally produce. So corals will naturally produce hydrogen peroxide in very high amounts when they are stressed. This has been correlated, like there's positive correlations, peer-reviewed data, lots of different papers, but this is, basically directly leads to bleaching events, to like basically pathogenic events where the holobiont will shift it to a pathobiont. So if we're thinking about like, yeah, it'll kill pests, it'll kill any bacterial issue, but you're harming the coral's tissue just as much as all of those things. If this is something we want to limit from the coral naturally producing it, it doesn't really make sense for me to like use it as a dip. I mean, it's extremely caustic. Even if you're using like the humble fish concentrations, you are still significantly stressing the coral out, which, is not good. I mean, okay, it's good for getting rid of algae. Add herbivores, I'm with Rick Ross on that one. Like, don't use peroxide. There's so many other things out there like potassium chloride, any of the tea tree oil based dips like Revive, Coral RX, all of them that do the same thing pest control wise, and they are not as stressful. So yeah, I am against peroxide based dips. Does not make sense to me from a biological perspective. And then number 4, I don't use antibiotics, period. If you want the lowdown on this, I can give a rant. I've talked about it many times before. Antibiotic resistance, you don't know what you're targeting. You can wipe out the good guys as much as the bad guys. Might work in the short term, but in the long term, you're shifting the microbiome permanently. And on top of that, if the problem is in your tank, the microbiome in your tank, even if you wipe the slate clean on the coral you're dipping, that means that any of those symbionts, whether positive or opportunistic pathogens, will then come back into contact and reseed the coral, which just causes the same issue again. So you'll just stress out the coral dipping it in antibiotics, and then after that, it could just get reinfected again in the same system. And then if you use antibiotics in tank, you're really wiping out a lot of the good guys. And there is no way to replace that stuff unless you're using live rock. But even then, doesn't do it. Could dipping corals contribute to resilience on more wild-caught corals rather than supporting sustainable clean aquaculture? So it depends on what you mean by resilience. Oh, reliance. I misread that. Jesus. Okay, could dipping contribute to reliance on more wild-caught corals? I guess, right? But even right now, dipping is not a completely clean-cut way to solve issues in terms of the microbiome, right? Like there's not a dip on the market that exists that can solve all of these issues. So in terms of, the larger eukaryotic pests like flatworms and nudies and red and black bugs and things like that, there are very practical solutions that exist. You can interceptor the whole system, get rid of black bugs and white bugs and things like that. So I think that those things have made it a lot easier to bring in wilds without a significant losses as what's occurred, in the past. But even back then, there was freshwater dips and rudimentary ways to dip these corals. I mean, plain and simple, wild corals are cheaper. You can get huge colonies in. You can frag them down, sell the frags for retail if you're someone that is from import to retail and you skip the wholesale side. And there's quite a few people like that out there. So if there are practical solutions out there on the market to resolve those things, I think that could definitely, incentivize that. But I think in the coming years, there's going to be a larger emphasis on aquaculture anyways. I think that, there's been legislation pushed every single year. And I'm not like knock on wood that it's not going to ever get passed, but there definitely seems to be a lot of pressure to close down exports. So, and even then, aquaculture is getting better. It's getting faster. We're doing things like scalemia and acanthophilia, things like, and also there's spawning now. So I can see in the next 30, 40 years that eventually the hobby will reach a point to where aquaculture could theoretically become cheaper than even importing, and you don't have to deal with the associated die-off compared to that. So, if it reaches the scale to where supply outpaces demand and prices continue to drop, then yeah, I can see it replacing wilds. But as of now, I think that probably dips definitely support bringing in wilds. Yeah, it makes it easier. You avoid losses. So from an economic and logical standpoint, makes sense. KFC dip torches after a week or so. You got me talking about Kentucky Fried Chicken again. Yeah, so like I was saying, antibiotic resistance, you don't know what you're targeting. There is a consortium of pathogenic bacteria. It's not just Vibrio. It's not just Acrobacter. Although Acrobacter has been associated with a lot in our aquariums, there is a whole pathobiome. There is a shift from a healthy microbiome to an opportunistic one. And the problem is many of these pathogens are actually good guys. When the coral is maintaining its own homeostasis and there is no external stress that's involved, all of these microbes are associated with and assist the coral. But what happens is once there's a stress event, they switch to being bad. It's like Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde. That's something Taras said that I really liked that I've been using. But so the thing is if you can revert the microbiome back to that healthy state through reducing stress in the coral, having a healthy microbiome in your tank that can reseed it, having probiotic strains that can outcompete those guys that have become pathogenic, that is a much better alternative than using antibiotics to wipe out everything. Because then there's the remainder of the good guys you're killing. And a lot of these bad guys are not always bad. They are good. So if you wipe them out, then you're leaving the coral with nothing, and they rely on these symbiotic partners. Additionally, on top of that, you also have resistance that can occur. So if you get the dosage wrong, you get the time of exposure wrong, then if you're not killing absolutely everything in that population, things will adapt and evolve to these relatively quickly, which means then you're going to be in for a world of hurt. And I have personally experienced this. I was messing around with antibiotics before the KFC dip came out. And I tried everything. I've tried stuff that people have not talked about. And I was relatively ignorant about how these chemicals work. And I was just throwing whatever at the problem. And while I had short-term success, eventually I lost all of my euphyllia to jelly. And I had dipped them in everything, you know? So I think that misuse of these things is very dangerous, and it applies to humans as well, right? Like antibiotic resistance. We've got superbugs in hospitals now that are not be able to be treated. They're like anything that are like MRSA is like really killing a lot of people. You know, it's pretty scary stuff. So yeah, I don't use them. Now, like let's say you get an aquabiomics report. You've got a pathogen that's known. It's in high concentrations. There's peer-reviewed data that says we can use this concentration of X antibiotic to reduce those populations. It makes a little bit more sense then. You are targeting a specific pathogen with a known concentration, a known time of exposure. That is a much better bet to make than throwing everything at a problem and you don't even know what the problem is. I mean, there's no one out there right now that's going to tell you here is what causes brown jelly and here is what consists of the pathobiome and show you the data. Absolutely no one. Okay, let's see. You need to consistently import diversity of your system from different vendors, correct? So yeah, you theoretically could bring in stuff for the coral, right? Like coral themselves have an associated microbiome that can transfer to the system. But like, let's say you got like a 700-gallon system already jam-packed with coral. Even if you're getting in, a single frag that's got the perfect microbiome, you seeded the tank with aquabiomic sand, you have whatever, everything, right? That's not going to have a large enough impact to probably shift the entire community population of the tank. So I think that live sand is a really good option, just because the amount of surface area per grain of sand, if you're getting like a pound of sand, it's likely higher amount of surface area than even a pound of rock, right? But yeah, the aquabiomic sand is the best option you can use right now. Been tested for pathogens. You got everything. You've got the good stuff in there. Right now, I have been testing different like live rock from different locales as well as live sand. So probably sometime in May, I think I'll have all the data ready. But it'll hopefully give us an idea, say sample size of 1. It's not very scientific at all, but it gives us an idea if, like, let's say Aussie live rock or Tampa Bay live sand has a more advantageous microbiome that could be used to seed tanks. Let's see. How's Lugol for dips? I just use it on some Heliofungia, and I bought and used. Super happy. I like Lugols. My go-to is potassium chloride. Potassium chloride is great. If you do it in a lower concentration, most anything can handle it. Higher concentrations, it can be problematic for Heliofungias, actually. Also, like Ghanies can't handle it very well. Montes even, if you're really pushing it. Some people do a higher concentration, but like the lower concentrations found in things like Reef Primer, things like that, commercial solutions that are potassium chloride based, they're pretty gentle on corals and they wipe out everything. You get spiders, you get nudies, you get flatworms, whatever. So you're not having the selectivity of other types of things like Bayer, and you get it all. So I like potassium chloride a lot. How can we tell when to act on killing algae or let it kill our corals, let it work itself out? I'm confused with the line or how to tell. So I'm with Rick Ross on this. I went on a binge watching his stuff the other day because I saw some comment he posted and I was like, that's pretty intelligent. So the idea is don't try to reduce your nutrients. That can cause so many other issues in your tanks. Keep your current nutrient input. Yes, Rich Ross. What the hell? I said Rick Ross, like Rickroll. Yeah, Rich Ross. Yes, Richard Ross, not Rick Ross. That's so funny. I didn't even catch I was saying that. I'm so Pavlov to talk about the Rickroll. Anyways, though, I think adding the correct amount of herbivores is very important. So getting a really robust cleanup crew, like urchins, sea hares are really great. Abalones, if you can get them. Trocus snails, they'll reproduce. Stomatellas, they'll reproduce. Hermits are so underrated, man. Like in my farm systems, I just try to keep like 5 hermits per frag plug, and that is so many. but they do it all. They really take care of things. So instead of limiting the nutrient concentrations your corals might have access to, as well as all the other microfauna on your tank, it makes sense to me to add the, end result of that entire pathway, which is add the things that eat it. And I've never had an issue with adding herbivores and not having a problem. Now, sometimes you will get really weird things. You can get, you get so much bubble algae that you don't have enough emerald crabs to eat it, even if you add like 1,000. There are lots of other, turf algae can be one of the hardest things. You can get chrysophytes, which are not technically an algae. Like, there's a lot of weird ones. Fluconazole, it definitely works, but I'd like to see an aquabiomics test before and after to see what it actually does. I feel like it can't be good, but it does work. But, manual removal plus adding cleanup crew is what I would do. Would it be worth adding live sand to an established tank to diversify the biome, or is that a bigger risk than reward? That's your own option to make. I'm not going to encourage anyone to do things now because Remy got a not so good batch, but I think it's good. I think there's not really any risk if you're using the aquabiomic sand, right? So they have cleared it of the pathogens. It is only beneficial or at least benign microbial constituents. So that's a good way to do it. Yes, I think that adding live sand, live rock is great. Let's say you're just using pure live rock, from the ocean. I think the bacterial diversity you get is probably a lot better than dealing with a mantis shrimp or two, and they're cool. Little off topic, but SPN I believe has caused some sort of bacterial issues. I use chemically to combat the issues, but since it's antibiotics will wipe out your good bacteria, what do you recommend? Yes. So I actually have an article up on Reef Builders, if you've not read it. It's called Dysbiosis in the Pathobiome. And I kind of break down the entire molecular pathway from a literature review, looking at all the different literature that's out there right now and saying this is the likely way that corals have bacterial infections occur. And I basically explain, some of the ways that there can be STN versus RTN. I think a large component of it is how resistant the coral is to that shift in the microbiome and how well adapted it is at being able to handle external stress and manage its microbial population and continue to regulate it during that time of stress. I think it also can be correlated to things like reactive oxygen species production. So if you got a hardier coral, it might be present as STN, whereas RTN can happen with a coral that's just a little bit wimpier. Also, there can be external factors. You can have things like fungal components come in. They can accelerate that process, which can also lead to rapid tissue necrosis. The thing is that with any of this stuff, it is not one size fits all. There's lots of things that have evolved to fill different environmental niches. So for instance, you could have an assortment of different bacteria, pathogenic fungi, even endolithic algae that can begin to outcompete the coral from within the skeleton that are going to be different in every single system depending on your microbiome, but they all can operate the exact same way. The conserved part of the pathway of having a coral get any type of infection is the fact that it's always going to start with abiotic stress. At least that is what all the data seems to be pointing to right now. Abiotic stress occurs. That causes the coral to produce different infochemicals as well as stress responses. That makes the microbiome unstable. It shifts to a pathogenic state. Those infochemicals then recruit external pathogenic bacteria, such as your vibrios and things like that, which then compound the issue. Slowly, the coral falls apart and is basically subjected to this cannibalistic act to where all the good guys that lived on it turn their back on the coral, and instead of living in harmony within its walls, they now eat it. And that's kind of how it works. So it could be lots of different types of bacteria that cause it. It's a consortium. It's always polymicrobial. There's not this one disease, one pathogen model like we're used to with humans, to where if you got COVID, it was the SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? It's not like that. It's a very, very complex world that's extremely different. And we still know hardly anything about it. I mean, there's so much science is coming out. Reef scabies, yes. In short, that. Have you noticed solitary LPS species like Cynorrhea scoles being more prone to infection? I've had trouble with Cynorrhea becoming reinfected after treatments. Lost nearly my whole brood stock. So in the shops I've worked for, acanthos were always problematic. And this is something I have talked to Andrew about, who works with Eli, Aquabiomics. And something that he pointed out was that a lot of his gonnies are very susceptible to infections when they're located next to the sand. And probably there is a distinct microbiome in the sand bed compared to in the water column or on your rocks or on a frag plug or on the coral. And that microbiome might be much more predatory or opportunistic towards the coral as a food source. So let's say we've got all these right, people keep scoles, cynorrhea, and acanthos on a sand bed. When I think about it, all the acanthos we had issues with continually were on a sand bed. And I've kept, endophilia and stuff here in my frag tanks and haven't had issues with them. Obviously, that's not a one-size-fits-all thing, but it might be something to think about. Maybe some of these corals having exposed tissue contact to the sand can kind of create this this boundary layer where there's like a war going on between two different, basically, microbial ecosystems. And sometimes maybe the sand bed wins. I mean, a lot of things in the sand bed are unlikely to be coral symbionts, right? They're likely biofilm producers, guys that help with nutrient cycling, and that nutrient cycling could become nutrient siphoning from a nutrient source that's touching the sand bed right there. So that's kind of my thought is, if you're keeping them in the sand, maybe move them. What's your thoughts on the little 9-watt UV filters for inside the tank up to 40 gallons to defeat dinos? This is the only space, only if you don't have a sump and limited space. Okay, so dinos, I had a rant the last Reef recap. I definitely watch it. But just the TLDR, a UV is going to be a Band-Aid solution for any type of dinoflagellant issue, right? Dinos will come from a couple of different main pathways: imbalance in nutrient concentrations, bottoming out on your nutrients concentrations, lack of microbiomes. People use Cipro, get dinos because they killed all the competition. One example, people bottomed out the nutrients, get dinos because they can outcompete every organism that's already in the system. So you basically want to start with a multifaceted approach. I've done this an assortment of times. I've always beat dinos within a week if I do this. So number one, up your nutrients, dose them, feed a ton, whatever you got to do, multi-pronged approach. Add things like pods. Sometimes some strains can eat it directly, which helps you a lot. Run carbon because a lot of these guys will reduce toxins, which cause a lot of other issues in the system. So you want to keep those levels down. And you can also limit your nutrient export, turn off the skimmer, things like that. Add some phyto. You could add any like the different heterotrophic bacteria. Got the aquabiomic sand, even better. Add those guys after your nutrients are up, and make sure not to add some like Microbacter 7 and things like that. Any of the heterotrophs can decrease your nutrient levels. So you're shooting yourself in the foot with that. It's not the diversity you want, and it's not even species that are local or native to saltwater environments that can even reproduce in the saltwater. So you're really doing nothing there but prolonging the issue. So phytopods, real bacteria, things like the hydrospace stuff can be good. And then reseed the microbiome. So sand potentially after you get your nutrients up. Blackouts can help for like 3 days, and have some carbon. And doing all of that, I've always beat dinos. UV is a Band-Aid, and I think UV is a little bad anyways. You like a Actinic T5 Salem. Do they benefit the corals or money for viewing? Yeah, I mean, when T5s are on, it's always weird to view, right? Like I'll use Purple Plus and stuff like that, and God, they just look weird. Pictures look so weird. But yeah, it definitely is great. If you have that varied spectrum. So like this, I guess I can probably can't turn the whole thing, but I've got 3 systems plumbed together here. This is the end one. I've got a Radion G4 XR30, and then T5s, 4 bulbs, and I got 2 Reef Bright XHOs, actinic, on there. And that's like a pretty good combo I've had luck with growing stuff. The middle tank, I've got an 8 bulb ATI dimmable and a Reef Bright. Then the far tank, I've got 2 metal halides, 2 T5s, 2 Reef Brights. And I'm just kind of playing with different spectrums, but the key is you want to get a very wide spectrum, I think, and I'll have an article about this. But yeah, I like actinics, but I like everything else too. So like Coral Plus, Blue Plus, actinic, whatever, throw it all in there. Okay, what is a very reliable salinity meter or tester? Sorry to go off topic. Give me 2 seconds. I will run and get it. So here's the way to do it. Hydrometers, God, they suck. You got to calibrate them so much. Here's what you do. refractometers. This is a hydrometer, tropic marin hydrometer. It's calibrated. You get a little PVC doodad you make yourself from like Menards or Home Depot. You fill this up with your tank water. You let it float in here. You never have to calibrate it. You just have to make sure your temperature is within range. You know the temperature of the water. Then you look at a chart on the website. All the hydrometers are good. I like the Tropic Marin one. You're never going to have to worry about salinity again. If you're using a refractometer, my God, you got to calibrate that thing every time. RO water, wipe it off. Put, the calibration solution on there. Make sure the calibration solution is not off. So don't ever leave the cap off more than like 2 seconds. They're just a pain in the ass compared to hydrometers. I switched to hydrometers and so much easier. Have you experimented with Interceptor as a treatment for acropore eating red, black, and white bugs? I have not actually ever had to use Interceptor. I don't really mess with sticks yet, but I have a feeling I'm going to get very into them this spring, going to all the shows and stuff. But I mean, I know a lot of people have had success with Interceptor for sure. Obviously, I'd like to see like an 18S RNA test from Aquabiomics showing how the eukaryotic life in the tank could be affected. Might be some like potential beneficial protist or something that it could kill. But as long as you're not having a lot of cleanup crew and stuff in there, then I would say that it makes sense to use it. Sure. Aquabiomics sand, best option. Behind that, live sand from anywhere else. Behind that, live rock. So sand is the go-to because it's a larger surface area. So you are going to be seeding net more colony-forming units than rock, probably. That's using headcanon. I don't have data behind that, but it makes sense to me. So Aquabiomics sand, certified to have no pathogens. After that, everything else I just said. How to culture live bacteria plankton. You should talk to Taras. He's the man. But just like any other phyto, it's not too much harder. Got to remain very, very so sterile. I change gloves like every 2 seconds, spray myself with alcohol, wear a mask sometimes. I use the autoclave at the lab. You can't do that. You can boil the water. You can use the bleach method, but the bleach method really just like I don't get as good a growth with it for whatever reason. I might be doing it wrong. I might not have enough thiosulfate. I'm adding sodium thiosulfate. Probably need to talk to Tross about it and troubleshoot it, but I switched back to like sterilizing things using boiling, like autoclave and stuff. How would you recommend combat the STN? I know it's a loaded question. Do we even know? We don't know. No, no one knows. No one that tells you they knows what the hell they're talking about. It's like the whole quantum mechanics thing. Like anyone who says they understand string theory does not understand string theory, right? So there's just not enough data in terms of what's out there to really understand how to directly approach this problem from like a chemical standpoint. Like there's not a magic thing you add to the tank and it doesn't happen. Rather, you need to kind of approach it from the front end of things, which is we know that instability causes the shift to the pathobiome and infochemical production, which can recruit external pathogens. Keep your tank stable, So that's what I'm working on is just chasing stability. But we're going to switch from the questions now and do something a little bit fun, I think. We're going to switch to a tier list. So, Zoa tier list, everyone. I did not put every Zoa in existence on here because, my God, there's a lot of them. But I put some like notable ones I could think of really quick. So if you're not familiar with how a tier list works, basically this is a ranking system. So S tier is like the most badass, the best, and then, it goes down from there. So I'm going to be giving my personal opinion on some of these zoanthid strains and what I think. I will talk about growth rate, coloration, if I personally like them, if I make money off of them. Those are kind of my considering factors. So let's start here. Let's start with Rastas. Easy S tier, complete classic. I've sold so goddamn many of them every single show. At locals, ship them. They grow fast. They look great. They're a classic. I don't know why they would not be. Yeah, they're an S tier. There's no way they're not an S tier. It's like the Zoa that everyone wants to get. Will I be selling these at Reef stock? Yep, probably. I'm going to have a lot of Zoas there. After this, I got Solar Circus. So these are like, they used to be a lot higher in a couple of years ago. They were like 150 a polyp. They've dropped down. They're like 40 to 60 a polyp now. They look pretty cool. They grow fast. They've been a good money maker for me, but I'm going to put them like at C tier. They're relatively bland for a Zoa. There's a lot of Zoas that look like them. Some of the Stratocaster morphs and stuff that don't have the face and are speckledy can look very similar. There's just a ton of wilds that have came in on pucks that are similar. I don't think they're like unique enough to warrant anything higher, but they made me money, and they're definitely a cool one to have. Let's see, we got speckled cracks. I'm going to go with A tier, and that might be a hot take. I like speckled cracks a lot, but they grow fast, but God, they melt, man. And like, it's one of those ones where like I have success with so many high-end zoas, but every once in a while, like at least like 1 out of every 3 I frag will still melt. So they're just one that is not super reliable. You got to have a little bit higher par to get faster growth out of them, which not everyone has. So if you're sticking them in a zoa garden with other zoas, you're probably not going to get that fast of a growth, but they look great. They're they're fantastic zoas. I still like them, and they're still one to collect. Let's see, we got daisy cutters. I'm gonna put these at A tier too. I think they could maybe make it up to S. They're also a classic. They look really good. I've not liked them a lot in the past. I'm like, these are so bland looking. But underneath my halide T5 Reef combo, like getting that real full spectrum, the polyps have got to almost like nickel size, like really big. And that splattering on them is very, very attractive. So I think A tier on those. Let's see. So hornets, I just grouped them all together. I didn't want to post a picture of every morph, but S tier, also easy to collect. There's like 10, 15 different types of them now. I released one of them that I think is really cool. There's like the murder hornets and things like that. What's my favorite zoa? I'll do it next. It's an S tier. This is the ultimate space monster. I only know of 2 people in the country that have it anymore. I am one of them, but it is the most attractive zoa I have ever seen. You probably can't see the picture very well. That's my picture. So I like speckledy zoas, and they have the appearance of something like a reverse hallucination, flaming Brohican, things like that. They're black, like jet black, dark as you could imagine, with bright orange red speckles. It looks like this like hellfire ember thing. They've got a bright green skirt, and they are just so awesome to me. No one has them. They're super rare. They grow relatively slow. I have been so afraid to frag them, but that is the holy grail of zoas right there. Everyone's like, strats are so high end, bro. They're like $50 a polyp now. They're not that cool anymore in terms of like a market perspective or in terms of rarity, right? Like we're talking about high end zoas. What makes them high end at this point is supply. And supply, there's 2 in the United States. and between me and him, we've got like 4 polyps of it. Anyone that we've sold, they melt. Everyone loses them, but him and I have been able to hold on to them. Like SBB, Shane Backer released them a long time ago, and we've still got them. But those are my favorite zoa for sure. Both appearance-wise, rarity-wise, they've got it all for me. I have always loved them. So speaking of other high-end stuff, strats, B tier. They're not that cool anymore. I see them everywhere. I don't know. I like zoas that are rare. I think they look really attractive. They're really unique. They've dropped in the market, though, really oversaturated. B tier on the strats. That's my take. Get a better zoa. We need a new high-end. Psychosis. I like these a lot. You don't see them a ton still. They're not like extremely rare, but like they're oddball enough to where you see them like 1 out of every 5 shops you go to. Relatively slow growing. I think they look really good in low par or high par. Higher par, they get more of the purple speckles. Lower par, they're a lot more chill. And they're more of that black coloration, but they can get really, really long lashes. Oh yeah, Sunny D's, Little Shop of Horror, Mango Infusion. I forgot to put in like Sunny, like, Rainbow Infusion. I didn't put any of these on here. I need to get like a longer list. I just like downloaded like 20 things. Like, this is probably enough. Utter Chaos, S tier. Gotta have them. Also a classic. Purple Monsters, also an S tier. These are ones that you have to have in your tank if you have zoas. They grow fast. They always look great. They look like a high-end zoa, but they're cheap now. They used to be high-end zoas. The market just brought them down. Bam Bams. D tier. I hate them. They're bright, but God, they do not stop growing. They take over everything. If you have them on an island, they'll take over the island. They'll outcompete every other zoa. They're bright. They're nice, but it's like the Xenia of zoas, I think. Electric Oompa Loompas, B tier. I don't love them. I don't hate them. They're really bright. They're attractive. They sell well. They grow fast, but it's not like my favorite zoa in the world by any means. Golden basket butt kissers. I think these are an A tier. They used to be very high end, very very attractive and like hard to get. They've always grown pretty slow for me. Um, yeah, Bam Bams are a plague, man. They're not worth it. Don't add them. There's so many other orange or red Zoas you can add that are more manageable and I think more attractive. They're like a two-color Zoa. It's like what Zoas were cool in like the 1990s. Like, it's not what we got going on right now. Butt kissers, though, I think are cool. They're harder to find now. They grow slow. They look really unique. There's not really like any other Zoas on the market that look like them. So I really like them. They're more of a niche thing, though. Not everyone like has that in their tank by any means. GMK, it's a classic. It looks great. It grows great. Yeah, it's great. It's an S tier. I was really considering it for a second, but I think the GMKs are an S tier. One of the only cracks we have left. I guess there's ass cracks too, but Okay, these are like a weird niche one that I put on here just because I love them. If anyone has these, message me and I will PayPal you immediately. That's why I put them on here. I'm looking for them. They are called Razzle Dazzles. I think zoanthids.com released them like, I don't even know how many years ago. They're like a morph of like a Motley Crue or like what the hell are those little ones called? Like a Daisy Duke, but they've got like a really sparkly internal, and I've always wanted them. If someone has Razzle Dazzles, please message me. I will buy them. Name your price. Don't name your price, but Alien Anti-Venom, overrated as hell. Not as bad as Bam Bams though. C tier, grows really fast, can look really cool. A lot of stuff that looks like them. Don't love them. They usually take over racks and everything. Tasers, they're like Psychosis but less cool. B tier. Pikachus, A tier. I like them, but they're a micro. Like micros suck, man. They're cool, but they're not as cool. If you had a Pikachu, but it was the size of like, an Utter Chaos, I would really like them. But they're just, I don't know. I've never really liked micros as much. Same thing with the Charmanders. I'll put them up there. You got to have the two. I've sold the two as like, this ketchup and mustard pack, the Pokemon pack. Great money makers, great growers, but they're micros. I can't really give them an S tier. Butt Munchers, S tier. They've made me so much money. They're yellow. They're pink. They look like a Grim Reaper or something like that in lower par. They get this really crazy pattern. And higher par, they're bright yellow. They grow fast. They get long lashes and high flow. I've always really liked them. All right. The God Beast, I think B tier. I think they're pretty solid. They were higher end, a lot more saturated in the market right now. Very nice, attractive yellow. They get like a speckledy lash, but it's not the same as like a butt muncher, man. Like it's like the same thing, you know what I mean? Like higher end polyp gives you the same thing aesthetic wise. They're nice if you're trying to make money off of Zoas or you're a collector, but yeah. Exospheres are one I've always liked. I think they're probably an A tier. They've retained their market value at like 40 to 50 a polyp still. There's some people that undercut that, but that's pretty average on the market. They grow fast, and there's just like not many Zoas like them. Yeah, Yodas, right? So like Yodas, the Wabagong Wows. There's like the new stuff, like NYRA brought in some stuff. I forgot what they call them. I'll have to think of it, but there's a lot of adjacent Zoas to them. But for a long time, they were like the only thing like that on the market, and they really encapsulated that part of the market. I liked them a lot. Ass cracks. Ass cracks can look really, really nice. Like they cook up so different on people's tanks. Like I've seen some that just look like dog shit. And it's like, man, that's not that cool of a Zoa. But sometimes you see them at shows and it's like, holy crap, that's the coolest Zoa I've ever seen. And they're one of the Krakatoas. You gotta collect them. Let's see. I have Daisy Dukes last. They're fine, like a C tier. I don't know, they're nice. I just needed something else to put in there. So that's the Zoa tier list. We just wanted to experiment with this as like a format for this time. Obviously, it's not every Zoa. If we wanted to do like a tier list only episode, we can make it interactive. There's actually a way to where I should be able to link this website to the feed, and you all should be able to like and vote for what you think should go where. So if we wanted to do an entire episode worth, yeah, okay, we could do acros, right? Do we think community contest for acros? We could do all the different classic ones, the high-end ones, everything. Maybe like next week we could do an additional stream. We do Tuesday and we do Thursday. Tuesday is tier list night where everyone votes and we do all the acros. Acros for an entire hour. We do like 50 or 60 acros. I think that could be fun. No one else is doing this. I thought it'd be like a good idea to try it. It's been hot on YouTube for like a really long time. So we'll have to think of a schedule. We'll post about it. But yeah, if we decide to do it Tuesday or something, then yeah, we'll let you know. But we'll keep that in mind. Acro tier list next, where the users vote. So got 15 minutes left. We're going to open it up to community questions. So, I mean, I answered some questions earlier during my little rants about dipping and stuff, but this can be exclusively for any question. So if you want to talk about anything, I'm down to talk about it. I'll shit on some zoas. I'll tell you which ones I think are cool. I'll tell you which ones to invest in if you're trying to make money selling coral. We can talk about science-related stuff with the hobby. We can talk about equipment. We can talk about products. We can talk about anything. Talk about fish, shrimp. I like the little anemone shrimp. I like the Peterson anemone shrimp. Those are always really cool. You don't see them that often. What's up, Brett? But yeah. Ooh, what should I do with my 65-gallon Tide line? That's like the long one you've got, the rimless one, isn't it? I think that would look really good with acros in it, right? That'd be a good tank for acros. It would also be a really good tank for a lot of softies. And I feel like you, like Remy, you've been known for softies. You know, you had this like adjacent weeping willow, like a lot of your videos, you've had cool leathers. I think try to collect every type of sarcophyton out there, upgrade everything in the lagoon to that, and then do like all like meat type corals in the lagoon. So you've got like a Sinarina in there. Just have like 20 Sinarinas in a lagoon. And then you can just throw in food and feed this garden of mouths. I think that'd be cool. That's what I would do. Transition the lagoon to like just like 4 acanthos that are just the craziest ones ever that are huge, or like just one carpet anemone. Just like buy one of the rainbow ones, and the whole tank is just a carpet. It's just a mouth and a pair of clowns. I think that would be really goofy, but it would look cool. Like just like a sarlacc pit in a tank. And then the Tide line, just do softies. Collect the weird ones. Buy a bunch of stuff from like Pablo and Marine Farmers. Get like all like the lithophytons and stuff like that. So the sandbag acts as a transport system. Yes, that is my thought. That is definitely my thought. I think that there's a different microbial composition in the sandbed. Corals touching that sandbed allows for all of those guys to get onto the coral physically, which over time can cause problems. Obviously, it doesn't happen all the time, but it's a thought. It's a theory. Having some Gracilaria in the tank help bacterial problems. Red Frost article is super fascinating. Maybe, right? We don't have any data to support that yet, but at least a lot of the things that he was citing was they have included in different fish feeds and things like that. And basically, it can inhibit different types of bacterial pathogens when it's included in their food sources. Now, the question is if they produce a high enough concentration of those residual compounds to inhibit, pathogenic bacterial growth in a large water volume. That's the question we don't have answered. I think it'd be pretty easy to do like a BRS investigate type of video. We could probably do it with the Reef Builders team between all of us, where we can have 2 identical tanks, identical everything. One has Gracilaria and the other one does not. We test the microbiome over a course of time. That'd probably give us at least some anecdotal evidence. And yeah, I think that'd be cool. I think it's definitely something to explore. I've seen many people using ammonia bicarbonate to help with coral growth. I grow a lot of macroalgae. I know that macro grow due to processing ammonia prior to utilizing the free nitrogen. What are your thoughts on doing some trace into your tanks? I do it. Before I had more fish and was just feeding heavier, I was dosing ammonia. Yeah. All the Randy Holmes Farley stuff on Reef to Reef. God, he's a genius. I read that. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Why am I dosing nitrates? And then I switched. And I had some big bacterial blooms in the beginning, though. But at that time, I did not have a skimmer on my tank. So things would probably be different if I did it again. But yes, I think that it makes a lot of sense to dose ammonia to the system. I think that you're going to have a lot better of an effect on the nutrition of the corals paired to dosing nitrates. Like corals don't actually uptake free nitrogen. Some of their bacterial symbionts can, and they can get nutrients through them, like adjacently, but they will directly utilize ammonia. The actual animal will. So it makes sense to feed the animal directly. Yeah, I like ammonia on tanks for sure. Thoughts on a multi-tank system representing different sections of the reef? That'd be pretty cool. You could have like always thought the tall tanks are cool, right? So like the 30-gallon talls and stuff that are like 36, 48-inch tall columns, and you just have high light to low light. One of the pet stores I went to when I was a kid, it's called Picasso's Exotic Aquatics. They used to have all these really, really cool display tanks. And there was one that was a column tank like that. And I was like 10, just mesmerized looking at it because they had all these different weird macros. They had seahorses in it that were at the bottom. Then they had like acros up top. They had feather duster and cocoa worms. They had sponges in it. It just looked like to date, it's one of like the most diverse or more accurate looking depictions of a reef I've seen. And I think it'd be cool to have like a large scale like that. Like Andrew Sandler gets like one that stretches to the stories of his house or something, Yeah, mangroves you could do one, horizontally then, right? That would be really cool. You could have like a mangrove forest, have it be a paludarium. So you get like mud skippers in there and like fiddler crabs and vampire crabs and stuff. You could have a whole terrestrial section to where you have like anoles and stuff like that, or like arboreal, like do some chameleons in there, and then have the auto top off be the misting system for all of that, which would maintain the humidity for any reptiles or amphibians, and it would top off the tank, and it would mist the mangroves. You have that transition to an intertidal zone where you've got all that stuff. You can have like live rock there. You can have the intertidal seagrasses, and then you can have it go off and do a reef. That would be badass. Andrew Sandler, please make it. If anyone could do it, it's you. That needs to be something like in a public aquarium. I never even thought about it like that. It'd be way cooler horizontally for sure. But we're going to wrap up here. We've got about 8 minutes left. So final thoughts and questions. We're going to have a couple more here, and then we're going to log out for the night. So if you got live rock and wanted to culture it and establish bacteria on dry rock, how would you run the system? As in like you wanted to just like cook the rock? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying you have a system where you started it with dry rock? Like, are you saying you want to seed dry rock with live rock and you're asking how? Or what? Could you restate your question? And then I can answer it better. Are you keeping NPS corals? My reason for asking about bacteria plankton earlier is due to the fact that I had some success keeping Dendronephthia for 8 or 9 months by feeding dried bacteria plankton. Yes, I am. So I think I'm in the NPS group with you, actually. Yes, if you're in Levi's group chat, I think you're one of the new guys in there. But yeah, if you scroll all the way up, you'll see I had some success with the Chromonephthia, Dendronephthia, Scleronephthia, fairly long term. I cultured some different bacterial cultures like Bacillus subtilis and stuff like that, and was able to just have that on a doser. And I had a lot of success keeping them long term. I think also, just having like Rhodomonas and things like that could be an alternative to that. The thing is, you're just looking at that micron size, right? So you could really use any bacteria that's not going to be pathogenic. And I think that's where NPS is going to be going. I think that we need smaller micron food sizes, and that live bacteria as a food source is what makes the most sense. So absolutely. Dried is interesting. When am I going to be on Reef Therapy? I might be doing one live at Reef Stock. So in like 2 weeks, I think. That's probably the next time. We'll be doing some very interesting ones there, I think. But 5 minutes left. How about I get through 5 questions in 5 minutes? Rapid fire. Okay, external to an established system is not introduced past the established system, but at the same time trying to cook the draw. Okay, so I think what you should do, get like a brute trash can, have a lot of flow in there, have aeration even. You could even add nutrients, right? You could add ammonia to it and keep it to where a lot of those guys that are obligate on that can survive. And have all the dry rock in there, and then add the live rock in. And you could also carbon dose it as long as you have sufficient nutrients as well. And that could theoretically go and, spread that population from live rock to the dry rock. I think that'd be the way to do it. Cook the live rock like how you normally would, but also carbon dose in there. Keep high flow so you don't have anaerobic zones develop. You want to have, excess oxygen there so you keep the right guys alive. So that's how I would do it. Let's talk about natural remedies of the reef. Recently found a study that peppermint shrimp are reportedly eating flatworm eggs and others. I thought it was only aptasia. They might be a great pickup for one CUC. Yes. So actually, I was talking about this at the beginning of the episode. I've seen some people advocate for not even dipping anymore, and we just get lots of different natural guys to go and eat everything. So that's an example that I've seen a lot. Is some subspecies of peppermint shrimp seem to eat flatworm eggs. Then you've got all the different nudies, right? Like you've got the velvet nudies that'll eat basically every type of flatworm. Arrow crabs can eat euphyllia eating flatworms like the polyclads and things like that. That's something I've had experience with successfully. Bumblebee snails can eat vermitid snails and things like that. So there seems to be quite a few options out there for stuff. You know, six-line wrasses. The trouble comes when you get things like zoa spiders, gray, black, and red bugs on acros, and some of the Monty-eating nudies, or like any of the acro-eating nudies. Those are all things that right now there doesn't seem to be like a very good predator for. But in terms of everything else, there seems to be some decent options you could add to a tank or a quarantine system to help you do the work while, you know, in between dips and things like that. I definitely think they're a great option. Sit first part on accident. I've had success using nutritional yeast to feed NPS scallops and sponges. Have you ever used it? I've not, but I have really thought about that. I thought about it about like, oh hell, it was a couple months ago because we were learning about yeast in class, and I was like, this seems like a really good micron size to feed corals and things like that. I think I read some peer-reviewed article where they tested different coral foods, and one was a yeast-based one, and they did have some pretty good growth with it. I'll probably just make a coral food. I'll probably just make one in probably like next 2 years. I'm probably going to start playing around with a lot of these ideas and try to blend something together, and then I'll compare growth. That's probably what I'll do. Thoughts on bacteria or coral food? Sorry for the coral mix. Mix bacteria, coral food, amino acids, traces, carbon, all in one container, an hour later, then out of the tank. I don't like adding amino acids. I don't. And I've got a lot of hot takes about that I could talk about for hours. I don't add them. Everything else, maybe. So that's like the, you know, what is it Vung Ho, I believe is his name, on Reef to Reef. He does that approach. Alan and Vung or Hung, I think. I can't remember their names right off the top of my head right now, but they grow crazy acros and they feed that way. The only thing I would be worried about is you don't know what you're messing with bacteria-wise on a lot of these bottled products, and they can get contaminated very, very easily. So for all you know, you could have some bad guys in there that you're throwing in, carbon dosing, inoculating them, increasing the population. Then you just throw a gallon of Vibrio in your tank. So that's the scary part to me right now. I think everything else together makes a lot of sense, right? Like I think traces make sense in food too. But you got to do ICP stuff like that to keep track of it. But yeah, if you knew what bacteria you were adding and you were able to do it aseptically, I definitely think that approach could be a good one. But that's my worries on it right now are no aminos, and you could get some bad guys growing in there if you're not on top of quality control. All right, we got 2 minutes left. 2 questions, people, and then we'll time out for tonight. Answer to red slime. Is that what you were trying to communicate? I don't like to use ChemiClean. I like to get my nutrients in the correct concentrations. Most of the time you'll have cyano. Like I said, you always get it sometimes, right? No matter what you do. But a lot of the time cyano will grow if your nitrates and phosphates are imbalanced. So you really want to get them, you know, within a little bit better range. And the Redfield ratio, it's complete horse shit. I've got an article about that. Like, don't chase that. But there's a lot of anecdotal data out there for what ratios can work. The whole ratio idea is kind of BS anyways, but rather just getting them in a little bit better balance. So, you know, you always want your nitrates outpacing your phosphates by quite a bit, and then increasing the flow in those spots can always help. Thanks, Tony. I really appreciate it. Favorite euphyllia, splatter grail hammer, baby. They're awesome. Branching, Australian, bright green stems, bright yellow tips, plus the splatter. They are awesome. Is it possible to keep NPS and SPS in the same tank? If you're feeding them, yeah. That's a challenge, though. But yes, I think so, for sure. If you got things like rhizos or like sun corals and stuff, a lot easier. But the dendronaphthia, stuff like that, they're pretty difficult. Explain balance versus ratio. Okay. I see what. Okay, so let's see. Forget keeping these things within ratio to each other. So no Redfield ratio. no exact like here is what this should be compared to this, but rather I mean all the data writ large basically says that nitrogen as a chemical species is in higher concentration than phosphorus as a chemical species. So like in some, you know, in some of my maintenance accounts, a lot of the tanks that get cyano will have sky high nitrate or phosphates, but like zero nitrates, right? So that's one example of what I'm talking about. Like I say, the whole ratio thing, basically all of that is anecdotal. The entire Redfield thing has been applied, and it's this game of telephone that has been very misconstrued. But yeah, I mean, Rich Ross also has a really good take on nutrients, which is they can get real high, nothing bad happens. Maybe 0.8% slower growth. When should I start feeding corals in a new system? 2 months at the moment. So you don't have to feed corals, right? You definitely don't have to feed them heterotrophically. You can get benefits from it, though. The most important thing, as long as you've got your nutrients, and it with a good routine, and you're not going to just spike things really fast and cause some issues, I think it's safe to feed them. I think that it's really safe to feed pods and phyto compared to like a lot of the commercial stuff. The commercial stuff is fine too, as long as you watch your nutrients. So feed them whenever, but also I don't target feed. Target feeding, you can overfeed them very easily. So it's best to broadcast feed. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We're going to call it a night tonight. I appreciate everyone tuning in to Reef Recap. We will be back next Thursday, and we will see about arranging another live stream to do where we go and do the acro voting thing. So see y'all then. Have a good night, and thanks for tuning in. Make sure to share it and check up with all the latest Reef Builders content. Thanks, man.